Now, before I go any further, let me clarify a bit. Plutonomy, as the Citigroup documents describe, and these are very long-winded documents, is of course the state of extreme imbalance, so extreme in certain countries that the investment community has little regard for the average person's consumption habits. In other words, the preference mutation has occurred as a result of the financial incentive system, where the consumption patterns of the general population become nearly obsolete in the interests of the wealthy, where they, the wealthy elite, the plutonomy, can now just trade amongst themselves and forget about the lower classes. In other words, so much money is being moved around between the rich that the public consumption patterns are nearly irrelevant. This, of course, makes sense when you think about the methods used to gauge health of the economy, which are supposed to be relating to everyone. GDP. GDP is basically calculated by how much money people spend or make on a given good or service. So using the example of net worth, if you have the top 1% controlling 35% of the financial wealth in America, with the next 19% controlling 50%, leaving the bottom 80% with 15%, you have 20% of the American population controlling 85% of the money. And this is what Citigroup figured out. This very small section of the population is what actually powers everything. What this means is that the financial system has little incentive inherently to care about the actions or well-being, essentially, of 80% of the public. And since we all know that the financial system is the most powerful influence on most governments in the world, especially the U.S. government, you begin to see that the only concern the ruling class has with regard to the majority of the population is merely to keep us complacent enough so a backlash does not occur. And I'm not projecting this. Citigroup makes us very aware of this explicitly when they state, we see the biggest threat to plutonomy as coming from a rise in political demands to reduce income inequality, spread the wealth more evenly, and challenge forces such as globalization, which have benefited profit and wealth growth. But don't worry, they're not too concerned. Our conclusion, the three levers governments and societies could pull on to end plutonomy are benign. Property rights are generally still intact, taxation policy is neutral to favorable, and globalization is keeping the supply of labor in surplus, acting as a brake on wage inflation. They summarize the heart of our plutonomy thesis, that the rich are the dominant source of income, wealth, and demand in plutonomy countries such as the UK, US, Canada, and Australia, countries that have an economically liberal approach to wealth creation. We believe the actions of the rich and the proportion of rich people in an economy helps explain many of the nasty conundrums and fears that have vexed our equity clients recently, such as global imbalances or why high oil prices haven't destroyed demand. Plutonomy, we think, explains these problems away and tells us not to worry about them. Secondly, we believe the rich are going to keep getting richer in coming years, as capitalists, the rich, get an even bigger share of GDP as a result, principally, of globalization. We expect the global pool of labor in developing economies to keep wage inflation in check and profit margins rising. Good for the wealth of capitalists, relatively bad for developed market, unskilled, outsourceable labor. This bodes well for companies selling to or servicing the rich. Sorry to pull you through all of that long-winded text, but I hope it settles in what people at the top are really thinking about behind the financial system. And they are likely right. The rich are going to get richer. The current economic decline that we're in now really doesn't mean anything to the top 20%. It's the 80% that continue to suffer. But hey, who cares? Evidently, the top 20% power the economy anyway, and I'm not even going to go into what this means in regard to our naive assumptions of democracy in the modern world. In fact, in the words of former Supreme Court Justice Louis D. Brandeis, I believe is how you pronunciate it, we can have democracy in this country or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we cannot have both. Now, I bring all of this up as an introduction to what we're going to talk about in regards to social health. Coupled with this, however, I think a few stats should be digested. In 2007, chief executives of the largest 365 U.S. companies received well over 500 times the pay of the average employee. In many of these top companies, the chief executive is paid more in one day than the average worker makes in a year. The Walmart family, which is about 6 people, the Waltons, has a combined fortune estimated at about $90 billion in 2009, according to Forbes. The combined wealth of the lower 40% of the U.S. population is only $95 billion. Also, the highest paid jobs on the planet are in fields of trading and investment, occupations which have no meaning whatsoever, create nothing. They are pointless to the state of society in the natural world. In 2005, the average annual take-home pay for managers of the top 26 hedge funds, aka gambling casinos, was $363 million each. Compare that to the average medical doctor, which makes about $150,000 a year, and the biological research scientists, which are looking for cures and treatments for diseases, which makes only about $68,000 a year. You get the point. Income equality is here, and it is growing, and it appears to be unstoppable when you look at the mechanisms of the financial markets and the culturally accepted reality of tremendous wage differentials among different fields. So now, we present the question, what does this mean to our health, to our well-being? Groundbreaking research by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett of the UK in the area of social inequalities in health and the social detriments of health has given us some profound realizations about what it means to have a society based and driven by inequality. To summarize this groundbreaking research, the common view that social problems are caused directly by singular material conditions such as bad housing or poor diets or a lack of educational opportunities and so on is being overturned. The idea that more wealthy societies do better than poorer societies in regard to health in general is not the case. The social problems abundant in rich, highly stratified countries are largely caused by the scale of material differences between people within society itself. The problem is not absolute income, but rather the problem of relative income. If you compare groups of people with the same income in different countries, you find that those in more unequal countries do much worse than those in more equal countries with the same income. It appears to be a psychosocial phenomenon. Inequality seems to make countries socially dysfunctional. And as based on measures of societal health, crime rates, and well-being, it is safe to say, as you will see me point out, that really our current structure is nothing more than a social failure. Life expectancy. On this chart, we see a specific set of wealthy countries. I apologize for those that can't read this in the back. I'll do my best to point out what is going on here. Basically, the y-axis you see is life expectancy, and the x-axis is income inequality going from left to right, low to high. Life expectancy, bottom to top, of course, low to high. As you can see in this, Japan has the lowest amount of income inequality, but with a staggeringly high life expectancy. While Singapore, trumping only the United States in this particular set of countries analyzed, which are mostly wealthy countries, has the greatest income equality, and the regression line in the middle shows clearly how the patterns moving from lower inequality to greater inequality reduces the life expectancy of all of these countries. Drug use. We see the United States as having the highest level of inequality based on the sample set, while also being within the top 4 of countries with the most illegal drug use: US, New Zealand, Australia, and the UK. While in the lower echelon you have Japan, Sweden, and Finland, which have the least amount of inequality and the least drug use. Well, Greece is in there too. It's the trends that are important here. You can see the clear regression line. I want to expand on this particular one. The reasoning for this, there was a study done in 2002 with macaque monkeys. In this study, 20 monkeys were observed and analyzed in regard to social hierarchies that developed in different circumstances, noting which animals were dominant and which were subordinate. The result was that the monkeys that had become dominant had more dopamine activity in their brain than they had exhibited before they became dominant, while the monkeys that became subordinate showed very little changes in their brain chemistry. In turn, after teaching the monkeys how to administer cocaine to themselves through levers, it was found that the subordinate monkeys took in much more cocaine than the dominant monkeys. In other words, it's a form of self-medication.